What's going on, everybody? My name is Nathan. This is the Salty Productions YouTube channel. Today I have a rather spicy deck tech for you in Lagrella the Magpie, which is primarily a combo flicker deck that is on the higher power end of the PEDH spectrum. I would say borderline on CPDH, which is the PEDH version of CEDH. Lots of acronyms here. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Pauper EDH, I just want to go over the differences in the format really quick because I cover a lot of commander content. PEDH, you can have any uncommon creature as your commander, which is very neat and opens up a ton of possibilities. But the main restriction is that you can only have commons in your 99. And so you tend to have decks that are very cheap because a lot of these commons are very plentiful in the market. And so, for example, this deck only runs at about $40 to $50 here on TCG Player. So it's pretty awesome with PEDH. It's a little bit of a slower format. I think most games wrap up between turns like 10 or 12 instead of like turns 8 or 9 in sort of your power level 7 commander matches. So Lagrella is a great option to have in your command zone because she's essentially a grasp of fate in the command zone. So I'll read her really quick. She is a 3-mana Bant commander, 2/3 human soldier. When she enters the battlefield, exile any number of other target creatures controlled by different players until Lagrella leaves the battlefield. When an exile card ETBs under your control this way, put 2/1/1 counters on it. So the way that she works in practice is you generally grasp of fate your opponent's worst things off of the battlefield, and then for you, you can exile a creature with an ETB that when you then flicker Lagrella with a creature that's exiled with it, that creature comes back, triggers its ETB, and then when she returns to the battlefield, you then exile that creature again so that each flicker spell that you use on Lagrella essentially you get to exile your opponent's best thing off of the field, and you get to trigger your best ETB on your side of the field. So she is very good, and it is very nice to have such a powerful piece of removal in the command zone because we don't need to gum up our 99 with a lot of those removal spells, although we are running a decent amount of removal in this deck just because this is more of a control combo oriented strategy. This deck aims to win by around turn 10. In my playtesting, I was able to assemble the combo to close out the game on turn 11, then turn 10, and then turn 7, and the turn 7 was a little bit lucky because I drew a couple of the pieces in my opening hand. So that is sort of where we're at in terms of length of game. Now let's go over some macro statistics in the deck before we get into the individual card discussions here. And by the way, if you enjoy this type of content, leave a like on the video and subscribe. I always appreciate it. It helps me out tremendously, and I make magic content like this on the regular. Okay, so taking this deck into Mox Field, after we adjust for our custom mana cost, the average CMC of this deck is 2.64, so pretty low to the ground, although 3 of these cards are the 1-mana cycling cards like Lorien, Reveal, Generous Ent, and Eagles of the North, so it depends on how you kind of view those cards. I view them as tapped lands, but I did leave them in the 1-mana slot here, but 2.64 is kind of where we're at. And then as far as lands, this is a pretty heavy blue deck. You can see our card costs here are primarily blue, and so the lands were actually packing mostly blue with 22 blue sources, 19 green sources, 16 white sources, and for cards like Evolving Wilds, I'm counting them across all colors because we can essentially grab any color for that. We have 16 tapped, 20 untapped lands, and then 7 utility lands, including the bounce lands, which I'll discuss in a second, that are actually crucial to one of the combos in this deck, and then 11 lands to deck thin. Now I know that deck thinning is mostly a 60 card phenomenon, but we are running as many deck thinning lands as we can in this build because Pauper EDH, you just have less tutors available to get what you need to assemble your combo. And so as we're turbo drawing through our deck, we also want to be pulling out basics via the Evolving Wilds style of tutors to just deck thin a little bit. So I've noticed, I pull out between like 3 and 4 basics on average with these types of effects. So, that helps out just a little bit, and we just want to use as many tools in our toolbox as we can to find our combo pieces. Okay, so let's cover the primary combos here, and for that I'm going to go down to our combo guide actually. So we are running the Peregrine Drake, Ghostly Flicker, and Archaeomancer combo. So I'll have those on the screen here. So the way this works is when you have an Archaeomancer on the field, you can play a Peregrine Drake, which will ETB untap 5 lands, and then if you play Ghostly Flicker or Displace either of these 2 cards, then you can exile the Peregrine Drake and the Archaeomancer. The Archaeomancer will return, and you will get the Ghostly Flicker back to your hand, and then the Peregrine Drake will enter and untap 5 lands. So that nets you 2 positive mana, and so you can do this over and over to generate essentially infinite mana. So there's a couple options. So Ghostly Flicker and Displace are the only 2 commons, unfortunately, that will allow us to flicker 2 creatures. You do have other options for Archaeomancer, although she is the cheapest. You also have Mnemonic Wall that can do the same thing, Salvager of Secrets, and Shipwreck Dowser as well that are equivalent effects. So the result of this is infinite mana, infinite ETBs, and infinite spellcasts. And that's important because we're going to use these as with other outlets to essentially close out the game once we have this. If you have any of these in your hand, these outlets can actually help you close out the game. So Aarakocra Sneak, I believe I pronounced that correctly. When it ETBs, you take the initiative, and let's cover the initiative really quick. The initiative says you go into the dungeon, the Undercity, and what we're really trying to target here is if you go through the trap room, which is the 3rd level down, it says target player loses 5 life, and so if you have an infinite number of ETBs, you can essentially just run through the dungeon as many times as you want, and you do have to trigger the archives room after that. So the only limitation to using the initiative as a way to close out the game is that you need to have generally at least 18 to 20 cards in your deck. The reason why that number is because if you assume each opponent has 30 life, so it'd be a total of 90 life divided by 5, I believe, is 18. So in this way, we're using the Undercity to close out the game, and there's a few different options that we can use to have the initiative. So Aarakocra Sneak, like I already mentioned, Avenging Hunter also has the same effect on a decent body, and Goliath Paladin also on a decent body for blocking. There's a couple of reasons to why we choose the initiative as the way to close out the game. You technically can also use extort mechanics because with this combo deployed, you have infinite spellcasts, and if you have infinite mana and infinite spellcasts, you can extort for the win. But the reason why is that the initiative, if we go back to the Undercity here, the first room says search the library for basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. And we want to be pulling lands out of our deck to not only generate resources into our hand, but also deck thin our way to the combo. So again, these support our game plan and are not just sort of dead cards otherwise. So we would be happy to play these even if we don't have the combo assembled. If you have any of the life gain effects with the combo deployed, you have sort of a soft win, assuming that nobody's playing Voltron and can either poison you or commander damage you out of the game. Essence Warden, so if you have, again, infinite ETBs, you can have infinite life, or any of the Soul Sisters, a la Soul Warden or Soul's Attendant, will generate you infinite life. We're also running Capsize, which will essentially bounce all of your opponent's permanents to their hand with infinite mana. You can buy this back over and over to return all of your opponent's lands and permanents to their hand, and you can essentially just infinitely lock them out of the game that way. So that's the primary combo. The alternative combo here is to have Cloud of Fairies. So when this ETBs untap up to 2 lands, we need a land enchanted with an aura that allows the land to tap for additional mana, such as Overgrowth, which allows us to tap for 2 additional green, or Market Festival, which allows us to tap for 2 of any combination of colors. So if we paired that with our other combo pieces, the Archaeomancer type of package here, and our Ghostly Flicker options, then we still generate infinite mana and infinite ETBs and infinite spellcasts because the Cloud of Fairies will enter, it will untap 2 lands. So essentially with your Ghostly Flicker, you're going to target both the Cloud of Fairies and your Archaeomancer, right? So that's kind of the assumption here. So the Archaeomancer will turn your Ghostly Flicker back to your hand, and then when the Cloud of Furies enters, it untaps 2 lands. The land with the enchantment on it will untap and tap for essentially 3, and then the other land will tap for an additional. So that's 4 total mana that you are untapping, and you can repay 3 into Ghostly Flicker. So that nets you 1 positive mana in that loop, and so we can then generate that infinitely for infinite mana and infinite ETBs and spellcasts. We can also pair Cloud of Fairies with any of the bounce lands, such as Sledging Sanctuary, for example, or Sunscape Familiar, which will reduce the cost of our Ghostly Flicker by 1, in order to have infinite ETBs and infinite spellcasts, but not infinite mana. And the reason for that is because when Cloud of Fairies enters, it will untap the bounce land and then another land, and that will only produce 3 mana. So you are not generating that incremental 1 mana. So instead you get infinite ETBs and infinite spellcasts, so you could add in an extort effect on the field to close out the game that way, but I have chosen to include the initiative because it generates more consistency by adding basics to our hand. There are some options for extort. Let me actually look at our other options here. Basilica Guards is an extort option you can play where you have a 4 toughness defender, so it can defend against some decently sized fellas on the battlefield. Okay, so that's the primary combo that we are trying to assemble here. Now let's go through the individual cards that are supporting this game plan to understand how we're going to get there. So first we'll start with our early game pieces. We are not running a lot of ramp, and there's an intentional reason for this. We want to be running a ton of card draw to try to turbo draw our way to our win cons. Coiling Oracle is just a great option in PEDH. It has sort of a super draw effect where if you draw a land, you can put it onto the battlefield untapped, which is pretty great. And in additionally, if you have your combo assembled and a Coiling Oracle on the field, you can change the target from the Archaeomancer, you can change the target so that with your Ghostly Flicker, you target the Coiling Oracle and Archaeomancer to then draw essentially your entire deck, put all of your lands onto the battlefield in order to get to your combo win cons with the initiative. We are also running Llanowar Visionary, 3-mana dork that draws a card. Again, we are trying to sneak in as many cantripping effects as we can. Market Festival, again, is a crucial combo piece if you're running the Cloud of Fairies combo. Overgrowth as well. These are all relatively mana efficient. Overgrowth is very mana efficient, but only produces the green. Market Festival does produce 2 mana of any color. And I just want to mention too, in case you want to sub out Llanowar Visionary and sub in another aura effect, we have, let's see, I believe it's called Dawn's Reflection, is essentially a functional copy of Market Festival there that you can run instead, and the reason for that is because we are running Heliod's Pilgrim to search for auras cards. So we currently have 2 auras in the deck. If you want a third, you can certainly sub out Llanowar Visionary and put in that Dawn's Reflection. Then we have Sunscape Familiar, which is just a fantastic card. Even in normal Commander, this is pretty great. It reduces the cost of all of our green and blue spells by 1. Okay, then let's go to our card draw options here, and I'm going to actually let's go to our tutors first. Actually, I think that's probably more important. So we're running pretty much all of the tutors that will get our combo pieces that we possibly can. Drift of Phantasms can be transmuted to search for our Ghostly Flicker or displace. Both are 3 CMC. Heliod's Pilgrim again can search for aura cards. So if we look at those options, it's essentially Overgrowth and Market Festival in the deck. You can also, if you really wanted to, you can also sub out some of the removal pieces and put in auras, such as I believe there's like some white or blue enchantment auras that nuke creature abilities, which I'll have an example of one up on the screen here. Then we have Merchant Scroll, which can search for any blue instant, but we do have to reveal it, so it might be scaring some folks, but I think it's still worth it to run because this can grab our Ghostly Flicker again. Muddle the Mixture can transmute to look for our Cloud of Fairies because we are looking for CMC 2. Step Through has Wizard Cycling, which means we can tutor for a wizard card, and our Archaeomancer, it turns out, let me go back to our recursion pieces here. Our Archaeomancer is a wizard, as is Salvager of Secrets and Shipwreck Douser, so a few targets there. And again, Vidalcan Aether Mage, again, we can search for a wizard, but this one is a little bit less good because we pay 3 instead of 2. All right, so now let's cover our draw because we are going to be turbo drawing as much as we can here. And this is going to be a mix of ETB effects and just generically good draw spells. It turns out that with sorceries and instants, you can dig a lot further into your deck. I know with Flicker decks, and sort of the habit of building as much soft synergy as you can into your deck, there's a temptation to put in every creature that, you know, cantrips because you go, okay, well, I want to be flickering stuff, so I'm going to put in the creatures that ETB. I think that's a little bit of a trap, and you need to include a lot of instants and sorceries that will dig you deeper into your combo rather than focusing on those soft synergies for this particular build. So let's just run through some. Azurfleet Admiral is great because it essentially says for the rest of the game, as long as this is on the battlefield, we will always be able to get the Monarch back and therefore always be drawing 2 cards per turn instead of 1 because it can't be blocked by creatures the Monarch controls. Behold the Multiverse can scry 2 then draw 2, and it can be paid in installments, which is pretty great. Brainstorm, we are running a lot of fetch lands, and so I figured we would pull out one of the old tricks from Legacy, which is to essentially you rerun Brainstorm, and then if you have a fetch land on the field such as Escape Tunnel, you put the 2 cards that you don't want to see back into the top of your deck, crack the fetch land, and then you can shuffle those away. Chrome Courier will ETB to dig for 2, and you put 1 into your hand and 1 into your graveyard. There is a tiny chance that your top 2 cards would be 2 combo pieces where 1 has to go in the graveyard and 1 has to go into your hand. But I've yet to come across an actual fail situation where that happens. And honestly, that would be really funny if it did. And sometimes you just have to, you know, accept you get dumpstered. And so if you happen to draw your top deck, your 2 combo pieces with Chrome Courier, then that's pretty sad, but it's an infinitesimally small chance of happening. Elvish Visionary is going to ETB draw a card for 2. So that's going to be great because we want a lot of these cantripping effects. Not only can we put it under Lagrella so that whenever we flicker Lagrella, we're actually cantripping with that flicker spell, but also these are great blockers because we do want to generate some board presence to help block and sort of mitigate some of that chip damage that will be coming our way. Eureka Moment, instant speed draw 2 and ramps us. What more can you want? 4C is going to be one of those 4-mana sorceries. We're going to scry 4, then draw 2. So it allows us to dig 4 cards into our deck, possibly even more if you bottom all 4. And this is very useful. It's one of those things where when you play a deck, you know, you find that you want these types of cards in your hand. And when you're building, again, sort of that mindset is, well, I need to build in a bunch of synergy, but it turns out when you play it, this effect is exactly what we want. We want to be digging into our deck. We want to be putting cards into our hands so we can dig deeper to find our combo. Frantic Search is going to be essentially a free spell that will allow us to dig 2 cards deep into our deck, but it is not card advantage because we have to discard 2 cards. But the nice thing is if we have a bounce land on the field or our Overgrowth or Market Festival attached to a land, then this can actually go mana positive because we untap a land that produces more than 1 mana. Muldrifter is going to 99% of the time be evoked for 3 mana, and then what you want to do is typically hold priority with the ETB on the stack and then flicker it to either draw a total of 4 cards for typically like 5 mana, or you evoke it and you You'd have to flicker it, but then you could also, if you have Lagrella on the field, which you probably will, you would actually flicker the Lagrella with the trigger on the stack, and so the Muldrifter would then go under the Lagrella, so that whenever you flicker the Lagrella, you draw 2. So that's a very, very powerful play pattern in this particular build. Of One Mind is going to be a draw 2 cards for 1 mana 99% of the time, which is absolutely excellent and certainly playable in normal Commander. Pond Prophet is a newly released from Bloomburrow, another functional copy of Elvish Visionary, and we can pay it with either green or blue, which is pretty nice. Quick Study is probably the weakest card draw spell in the deck. I would say it's a 3 mana to draw 2 at instant speed. And I just wanted to mention there is another possibility that you can run here in the form of Compulsive Research, which allows you to dig 3 cards into your deck instead of 2, and you have to discard a land card, which typically isn't a problem. We typically have a ton of lands off of the amount of cards that we're drawing, but the reason why I wanted to mention that is because Compulsive Research, unfortunately, is limited to sorcery speed, and quite often we want to be holding up removal or counter spells, and then if we don't need to use those, we then cast something like a Quick Study at instant speed to then draw some cards. So I wanted to incorporate the instant speed instead of the sorcery speed, even though that other option would dig us 1 more card deeper. Scattered Thoughts, 4 mana instant. Look at the top 4, put 2 of those into your hand and the rest into your graveyard, so it digs us 4 deep. Seagate Oracle, 3 mana, 1/3. Look at the top 2, put 1 of them in your hand and the other on the bottom. Just a great flicker target here. Spirited Companion is going to be another cantripping creature that's 1/1. Tammy's Epiphany, scry 4, then draw 2. Treasure Cruise, and what I've noticed is that in certain builds, so like my Emoti build, for example, sometimes can struggle to put enough cards in the graveyard to make Treasure Cruise actually be discounted. But in this particular build, we are cracking fetches, we're throwing flicker spells in the graveyard, we're doing a bunch of different stuff where typically you can cast Treasure Cruise for probably about 2 mana, which is pretty mana efficient to draw 3. Then we have Unexplained Vision, 5 mana, draw 3, and then if at least 3 blue mana was spent to cast a spell, scry 3. So this actually digs us 6 cards deep into our deck instead of only 3, which is why I'm including it. Typically we have enough blue mana to be able to meet that condition. Again, we are running 22 blue sources, and most of our cards are blue, so we're running pretty heavy on the blue mana production there. And so this isn't, theoretically, it's not super efficient, but I think the scry 3 afterwards just helps tremendously, and really any effect we can run that will allow us to dig deeper into our deck we want to be considering. So that's all of our card draw. There are a total of 18 sources of card advantage in the deck, which is pretty crazy. Now let's jump to our flicker spells. So we have 9 of these. Acrobatic Maneuver is going to be a flicker spell that's only a creature we control, but we draw a card. So it's not efficient, but it does cantrip, which is nice. Blur is going to be the same thing, 3 mana cantripping flicker spell. Displace is going to be, once again, one of those combo pieces, and it also has pretty crazy art there. Ephemerate, one of the most efficient flicker spells in the format. You get essentially 2 flickers for the cost of only 1 mana, which is pretty awesome. Flicker of Fate is going to be a pretty vanilla flicker spell. However, the reason why this is run over something like Justicier's Portal, for example, is because we can flicker other opponent's creatures. So if you want to essentially fog yourself for only 1 creature, you can blink something and then take it out of combat, which is pretty great. Ghostly Flicker, again, serving as our primary combo piece. Momentary Blink can be used twice, essentially, because it has flashback for 4, and if we end up tossing this into the graveyard with something like a Scattered Thoughts, it can then be flashed back. Planar Incision is, for the same reason we are running Flicker of Fate, this could be used on our opponent's stuff, and if you want to even interrupt artifacts or something like that, you can target artifacts with this. Now, granted, it enters with a 1/1 counter, but that's pretty, not really that big of a deal, I think. And then Scroll Shift, again, is another flicker spell that cantrips. So just running as many cards that can cycle through our deck as possible. And essentially with how much card draw we're running, we can be playing our land every turn. And so I've yet to run into a scenario where this deck does not play a land drop pretty much every single turn. Then we'll run through some miscellaneous cards here. I believe I only have 3. Oh, we have a removal category. Okay, so let's go through removal and then we'll touch on the miscellaneous spells. Arcane Denial is going to be counter target spell, and we get to refund ourselves the card at the cost of giving our opponent 2 cards. So that's still fine. It's perfectly playable even in normal Commander because it mitigates the card disadvantage of playing regular counterspell. Capsize we already mentioned as an infinite combo outlet, but can be used to bounce something in a pinch if you need to. Conclave Naturalist is going to destroy target artifact or enchantment. I will note here that because Lagrella does exile creatures, more of the removal in 99 is focused on artifact and enchantments, which you'll see in just a second here, but Conclave Naturalist being one of them. Counterspell, again, to protect our combo. We want to be holding up interaction, preferably when we try to combo off to negate any potential disruption. Dispel, in that same line of thinking, a lot of these counter spells or anything that we might face along the way is going to be instant speed, so we want to be mitigating instants, and I actually wish there'd be more effects like this printed at the common level just because I think it's such a good effect, but Dispel is very efficient for what it does. Memory Lapse is going to counter a spell, and that spell is going to go to its owner's library. So this is a more of a defensive counter spell, not to be used, I guess what I would say, like offensively, in that if you're protecting your combo, somebody is going to be trying to counter your Peregrine Drake or something. This will still be able to defend against that counter spell, and if they don't have any instant speed draw, then it's going to not really matter, because that will go right on top of their deck and be inaccessible while you win the game on your turn. Myconid Spore Tender is going to destroy an artifact or enchantment, negate another counterspell to protect our combo. Prohibit is a new card from Alice of Thunder Junction, which will again protect our combo. And then Resculpt can exile a target artifact or creature at the cost of the opponent creating a 4/4 elemental creature token, which can be a big deal sometimes. I will say the 4/4 is a little bit scarier in Pauper EDH compared to normal Commander. So it's, just be wary of that 4/4 coming back to bite you. All right, then we'll go over some miscellaneous effects here. So running 1 protection piece in the form of Seal of Removal, which is a 1-mana enchantment, you can sack it to bounce target creature to its owner's hand. This is a very flexible removal spell because it can be used either offensive or defensively. It can be used to bounce an opponent's creature that's might be threatening you for lethal, or it can be used defensively. So if our Peregrine Drake is entering the battlefield, its ETB trigger goes on the stack, and your opponent is trying to interact with it at instant speed to destroy it, then you can then pop this to then return that Peregrine Drake back to your hand, to then negate the removal spell, and you would still get the ETB off of that Peregrine Drake, for example. So it's essentially a 1-mana counter spell, kind of, sort of. It goes back to your hand, so you have to spend the mana on it again. But with something like a Peregrine Drake in particular, the mana disadvantage here does not matter because it untaps those lands. All right, and then we have 1 piece of Grave Hate here, the best in the game in my personal opinion, even in normal EDH. Relic of Progenitus is going to be able to cantrip while it exiles all graveyards, and we don't really care too much about our graveyard being exiled, I think, because even if we have a few spells in the graveyard to delve our treasure cruise, then it's no big deal to exile those. It's just worth that extra card draw. And then finally, we are running 1 Fog in the form of Respite. So prevent all combat damage that would be dealt. Oh, I'm sorry. This actually needs to be... All right, my apologies. I actually had to make a quick swap there because I realized the wrong card was in the deck list. We are running Blunt the Assault, which is a 4-mana instant. You gain 1 life for each creature on the battlefield. Prevent all combat damage that will be dealt this turn. So this is going to gain us between 10 and 15 life, I would say, on average, which is very nice. And again, we are trying to, especially with our life gain effects with all of the Soul Sisters in the deck, we're trying to go the distance with this deck to prevent all of that chip damage to make up for the fact that we don't have big blockers to hold back a lot of the damage that might be coming our way. So we have Blunt the Assault, and I just wanted to mention as well, there's other options with the fogs. So Fog of War is another option that's in heavy consideration for the slot. 3 mana, you gain 1 life for each creature on the battlefield, but it only prevents combat damage for creatures with power 3 or less. I just wanted to be a little bit more safe in case you run into decks with big creatures, because especially if you have Voltron type of commanders, you want to be able to prevent the combat damage for those creatures and not just creatures with power 3 or less. There's also Tangle, which essentially says attacking creatures don't untap during their controller's next untap steps with a fog attached to it. So that's pretty great. I believe Sam Black uses this card. And then Angel Song, which is a fog, but you can cycle it, which I was also considering for the slot. And you also have Dawn Charm, which is a fog, but it is modal because you can regenerate target creature or counter a spell that targets you as well. So there's a few different considerations here in the fog slot. I think there's even like a flashback fog that you can run. So I just wanted, 1 or 2 fog effects. The problem is I've noticed beyond 1 or 2, they tend to be just dead cards that gum up your hand if you're not going to use it. So, and Blunt the Assault is 4 mana, and that can be a lot to hold up. But I think that it is important to get that life gain, and you can honestly pop this off even if you don't plan on fogging damage, just for a life gain effect. Like if you're holding up 4 and you don't need to counter anything or draw any cards, maybe you just throw this out there just to get the life gain as well. So Blunt the Assault, I think you can definitely swap it out as you see fit, depending on your, how you want to tweak this particular build for the mana curve. So that is the deck, everybody. That is Lagrella the Magpie, Pauper EDH. I'll have a companion video where I'll actually be playtesting this deck. You can see how it plays out, the decisions that you make while you play the deck, and by approximately what turn it wins by using realistic assumptions like blocking and chumping, using mana on our removal spells. We don't just sort of live in magical Christmas land in these gold fishing playtests. We actually run realistic assumptions. So that's the deck, everybody. Hopefully you enjoyed, and if you did, leave a like on the video and subscribe for more Magic content, and hopefully we'll see you all in the next one.